So, my partner is obsessed with the musical Les Miserables. And I, being the not into musicals partner, I told him that one day I will watch a musical, provided that I've read the book first. And well, we all know that feeling when you sit down in the evening and you're suddenly confronted with a 1,500 pages of 19th century angst, theological tangents, and footnotes longer than your last relationship, which results in one very slowly turning away the book and praying that we don't have the money or the intention to visit London for a musical anytime soon. But why are big books so intimidating, and how can we learn to read them without feeling a sense of dread and fear at the idea of returning to them? I say this as someone who has read many big books in the past, and I still have that underlying fear whenever I have to confront a new one. The biggest book I have read was 1,349 pages, and that was A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, which I think was really wasted on me because I don't remember much of anything that happened in it. Yet, I absolutely loved The Count of Monte Cristo, which is just a shy shorter at 1,312 pages, and I can remember most scenes pretty vividly from that book, because who doesn't love a big pirate story? And even though it's been over a decade since I read them both, I remember a lot of Middlemarch by George Eliot and Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell, both of which are 900 pages and 700 pages respectively, and that felt a much bigger number to me at the time because I was having to read them simultaneously for a single lecture. So isn't that rather strange? I've had way more positive experiences with big books than I have negative, and yet I still find the idea of reading a big book daunting. So I actually turned to my Patreon members to ask their opinions of big books, and so many of you replied. Thank you so much. I'm going to share a few of your insights right now. Like Rochelle, for example, replied that really the time it would take to finish a big book, which they find a little bit more kind of like a hurdle in their way. When they have such little time in their day to read for fun, the idea of reading a big book, which would take over such a large amount of time when they have so limited time to spend on books, is why they are reluctant to go there. However, Dinah hit on a point that I've been leaning towards when attempting to hypothesise where a lot of people's fears come from. Dinah wrote, quote, "I think it's more a mix of me getting back into reading and the size being quite daunting. But I think it's sort of fueled by this need to complete more books." And then other people replied saying big books just don't keep their interest. Though a lot of my Patreon members aren't afraid of big books. In fact, they prefer them, particularly if they read, say, fantasy or sci-fi, because that kind of just comes with the criteria, really. If you're not reading a 700-page novel, you haven't started book one of a series. But I want to return back to Dinah's point. I think Dinah actually hit on something that's a very common thread amongst people, particularly in today's Goodreads age, as I call it. I think a lot of people are afraid of reading long texts for fear of reading fewer books within a preconceived time frame, such as annual reading goals. Because if you've only read one book that month, you may feel embarrassed or even ashamed of how little you read compared to a friend of yours who recently read 12 that month, even though that judgment is entirely internalised, because who would have friends who would be so judgmental? But I feel this because I have friends who regularly read between 12 and 15 books a month, and they find that really easy, and what they class as a reading slump for them is only reading like 7 books a month. Meanwhile, a reading slump for me would be 2 books over, a 9-month period. And being around bookish people or following bookish people online can lead to a lot of internalised judgment around what and how much you're reading. And it's easier to keep up those numbers if one sticks to shorter books. Another reason may be that reading large texts may bring around a lot of uncomfortable feelings one may have about themselves, such as if you're insecure about a learning disability or perhaps ADHD. Spending a long time on a text and potentially struggling with it may trigger some unpleasant feelings and of shame that one would rather avoid if possible, and thus big texts are avoided as a protection mechanism rather than disinterest. Hello, I am just interjecting today's video to talk about today's sponsor, which is Foreo's FAQ 202 mask, their new generation of LED face masks. I'm really into my skincare, and it's always important to me that I work with companies that reflect my ethics, primarily being cruelty-free and vegan, so I was really excited when I started working with Foreo. I think I've been using this mask for 4 months, probably actually going on to 4 months now. It is a lightweight, flexi-fit silicone mask, which is completely wireless, making it really easy for me to wear around the house when I'm just sitting there reading on the sofa or if I'm watering my plants. And how this works is red LED light therapy reduces inflammation and stimulates the production of collagen, which someone in their mid-30s is starting to lose collagen production. And with its 8 different wavelengths, including NIR, this mask can help tackle signs of aging and other skin conditions, from redness, helps with dullness, minimises the appearance of pores, reduces fine lines and wrinkles, and making skin appear smoother with fewer sunspots.
I'm currently wearing the mask right now, and I'm using it on the app right here. I can use the app to try different things. It'll tell me what it's for. So red lights for like diminishing signs of aging, and it'll swap between them. So it's pretty fast in terms of its action. I just have to swipe it. I can't do it backwards. So it will change the settings to it. So I can pick my own light control, smart control. I can pick what I want to treat it for and how long I want to set it for. And I can do high, low, or medium, and I just click start, and it will start that treatment.
And what's very exciting is Freo is celebrating its birthday, so it has new amazing deals all over their website right now. So if you click my link in the description box down below and use my code, you can get an extra 35% off almost all Freo products. And this code is stackable, so even discounted items get an extra 35% off, which is amazing. Thank you, Freo, as always, for being a lovely sponsor for this video. And now let's get back to the video. Another one of my Patreon members, Liz, says something which resonated with me too. Oh, well, an element of it. She wrote about how part of her is scared that if she starts something and then falls off halfway, it will prove to her that she's incapable of completing things. And the other half of her was scared that she'll find out that the book isn't magnificent inside, and then they'll feel just disenchanted by the whole experience. I think the fear of not completing a book is a real hang-up a lot of people have, and it's definitely something I believe was drilled into us when we were children. I don't know where this generational judgment came from, but it seems to be a branch of the same ideology which goes, you must eat everything off your plate because there are children in Africa starving who would eat that. You see, both finishing your book and finishing off your plate are laced with layers of moralistic judgment, which extends all the way to careers where, boomers have perpetuated the idea that staying in the same job for 50 years and never job hopping is the pinnacle of the ideal worker, and us millennials are a disgrace and unemployable for doing otherwise, like we really had a choice. The fear of being seen as a quitter is something that I see a lot of people struggle with. Everyone I know will push through to the end of a book that they're not enjoying just to say that they finished it, and I'm like a madwoman dropping books left, right and centre after 100 pages. But I also see that fear of quitting extended into other areas of these people's lives, such as concerns of changing career, being seen as a failure, or ending relationships that they're not happy with. However, what I did relate to was Liz's second half of the comment, where they said about how the fear of being disenchanted by a text, that is not actually as good as you thought it would be. And that's very relatable to me. I have such immense excitement for all the books in my library that I have not yet read, but I'm also terrified of reading the vast majority of them for fear of them not living up to my expectations. And sometimes that's the reality, particularly when it comes to long books. Sometimes they're pretty slow and dense, and they're just long for no reason. I'm looking at you, Victor Hugo, and your obsession with the Parisian sewage system. Really, quite honestly, I think everyone's got that weird hang-up in their books. There's always something that drags out far too long, and a lot of people just don't edit it out, and I don't know why. So, with all that in mind, what are strategies that we can employ to get over this fear of reading a book, whether it's War and Peace or Les Miserables? How can we actually do this without being terrified? Well, obviously, the first thing is to break it down. I have a little reading journal, highly recommend little reading notebooks or something that you have, where you can give yourself little deadlines and challenges to break down a book. So I don't give myself a deadline with a date, but you may find that helpful. I instead give myself a checkbox of reading chapter of certain books. If you are someone who likes more structured deadlines, you can give yourself a challenge such as read 50 pages of War and Peace a day, or read 100 pages of War and Peace a day. And then with that challenge, you can work out when you can actually finish certain books by certain dates. So you can divide it over weeks or months per se. So you can say you want to read chapters 1 to 6 in the month of June, and then 7 to 10 in the month of July. But if you know that you're busy in August, you can just say, I'm only going to read 11 and 12, and that's all I'm telling myself to achieve. By giving yourself these goals of like how you break down a big book, Whilst dragging a book out over months may seem horrifying, again, please see that group who read Finnegan's Wake, I think over like, what was it, a 25-year period or something ridiculous like that. I would argue that breaking down a big book over a longer period of time, whilst it may seem irking to you, is better than never reading something you want to read because you're just scared of wasting time on the book. You won't be wasting it because if you give yourself deadlines, you can then read other books in between, so you can feel like you have multiple projects on at the same time. Even just reading 10 pages a day as a little routine checklist in your to-do diary every day will actually add up much faster than you think. Reading 10 pages of War and Peace a day doesn't seem like much, but if you're never going to read War and Peace, then you might as well start with 10 pages a day. You'll probably then surpass 10 pages a day every day when you do that, and it'll go by much faster. It's a bit like the whole, couch to 5k kind of challenge. It's just how you work. But if you give yourself a minimum of 10 or 20 pages a day of a book, and you can either exceed that but don't go below it, you'll actually complete books much faster. Similarly, you can read with others by joining a Discord server that offers the same opportunity, or talking to a friend who may be interested in reading the book. And if you use social media, perhaps just even do a challenge with yourself where you document it over a period of time and you have to check in on a certain date every month to see where you've got to. Even if no one's following, it keeps you accountable. Also, let's give a PSA right now. Audiobooks are not cheating. If you have the ability to have an audiobook alongside your book and you feel that works for you, please do it. I can't swap between two mediums, but I know a lot of people who do. So they'll read certain books by themselves, and then when they are travelling or out a day, they hop to that chapter where they left off and listen to the rest on audiobook, and then return to the physical medium in the evening. I am not organised enough to do that, but if you are, highly recommend it because it really works for them. Also, if you just want to listen to a big book via an audiobook, that is also valid. I hate the judgment of audiobooks is not real reading because it's incredibly ableist. If you'd like some audiobook recommendations from me, absolutely. There are certain books that I would never have read had I not listened to the audiobook version of them entirely, so I can give you my favourite audiobooks recommendations in a video if you're interested. And another thing to do if you are keeping a reading journal with your goals is to keep a reading journal of notes, such as characters' names, themes, relations and things like that, so you don't get confused. You can do this on sticky notes in your book, but you're risking potentially losing them, but actually sometimes when you're on the go, it's easier to have your own reference sheet in the book itself. So you use washi tape to keep down your notes so they don't fall out. For goodness sake, I've learned this the hard way. And then you can have a reading journal as well for bigger themes in case you feel like you'll forget things over a longer period of time. But in the front of all of my books, I have usually some kind of key when it gets a bit complicated about who is who and what is what. And I tend to be a bit more brutal because I write all over my books. So I just write it on a blank page in the front of the book. But if you want to keep it more maintained, sticky notes are the way to go with washi tape. Because let's face it, washi tape is a completely pointless, worthless substance unless it is keeping down note points. But I think it's important to remember when it comes to long books is that you don't have to master the book. You don't have to become a scholar of it overnight and be questioned and quizzed on it by people. You're not preparing yourself for an episode of a university challenge or an exam. It's just out of curiosity rather than perfectionism. Some of them are more challenging than others, but it's not because you're not smart enough, it's just the way things are. And sometimes they need more patience and more time, and that you can give. Remember, it is nothing about intelligence, it is purely down to the amount of patience and time you're willing to give to a text. That's it. And everyone has patience and time that they can give, and that can vary. Some months it may be better than others, and that's fine. But thank you so much again for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving it a like or subscribing to my channel. I appreciate that too. And also thank you as always to my Patreons who make it all possible, and I just genuinely am so grateful for all of you. There's also a Google form sheet down below, so if you have a bigger request or a more detailed request for a video in the future, leave it there. I have a spreadsheet where I'm keeping track of all of them and I'm working through them slowly, so thank you so much. And as always, I hope you are happy and healthy, and remember, books save lives, so keep reading.